Part 3, Chapter 8 of To Let. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. The Forsyte Saga 3, To Let, by John Galsworthy. Part 3, Chapter 8, The Dark Tune. As Soames walked away from the house at Robin Hill, the sun broke through the grey of that chill afternoon in smoky radiance. So absorbed in landscape painting that he seldom looked seriously for effects of nature out of doors, he was struck by that moody effulgence. It mourned with a triumph suited to his own feeling. Victory and defeat. His embassy had come to naught. But he was rid of those people, had regained his daughter at the expense of her happiness. What would Fleur say to him? Would she believe he had done his best? And under that sunlight faring on the elms, hazels, hollies of the lane and those unexploited fields, Soames felt dread. She would be terribly upset. He must appeal to her pride. That boy had given her up, declared part and lot with the woman who so long ago had given her father up. Soames clenched his hands. Given him up? And why? What had been wrong with him? And once more he felt the malaise of one who contemplates himself as seen by another, like a dog who chances on his reflection in a mirror, and is intrigued and anxious at the unseizable thing. Not in a hurry to get home, he dined in town at the Connoisseur's. While eating a pear, it suddenly occurred to him that, if he had not gone down to Robin Hill, the boy might not have so decided. He remembered the expression on his face while his mother was refusing the hand he had held out. A strange, an awkward thought. Had Fleur cooked her own goose by trying to make too sure? He reached home at 9:30. While the car was passing in at one drive gate, he heard the grinding sputter of a motorcycle passing out by the other. Young Mont, no doubt, so Fleur had not been lonely. But he went in with a sinking heart. In the cream-panelled drawing-room she was sitting with her elbows on her knees and her chin on her clasped hands, in front of a white camellia plant which filled the fireplace. That glance at her before she saw him renewed his dread. What was she seeing among those white camellias? "Well, father?" Soames shook his head. His tongue failed him. This was murderous work. He saw her eyes dilate, her lips quivering. "What? Quick, father!" "My dear," said Soames, I did my best, but—" And again he shook his head. Fleur ran to him and put her hand on each of his shoulders. "She?" "No," muttered Soames. "He. I was to tell you that it was no use. He must do what his father wished before he died." He caught her by the waist. "Come, child, don't let them hurt you. They're not worth your little finger." Fleur tore herself from his grasp. "You couldn't have tried. You betrayed me, father." Bitterly wounded, Soames gazed at her passionate figure writhing there in front of him. You didn't try. You didn't. I was a fool. I won't believe he ever could. Only yesterday he... Oh, why did I ask you?" "Yes," said Soames quietly. "Why did you? I swallowed my feelings. I did my best for you against my judgment. And this is my reward. Good night." With every nerve in his body twitching, he went toward the door. Fleur darted after him. "He gives me up? You mean that, father?" Soames turned and forced himself to answer. "Yes." "Oh!" cried Fleur. What could you have done in those old days?" The breathless sense of really monstrous injustice cut the power of speech in Soames's throat. What had he done? What had they done to him? And with quite unconscious dignity he put his hand on his breast and looked at her. "It's a shame!" cried Fleur passionately. Soames went out. He mounted slow and icy to his picture gallery and paced among his treasures. Outrageous! Oh, outrageous! She was spoiled. Ah! And who had spoiled her? He stood still before the Goya copy, accustomed to her own way in everything, flower of his life, and now that she couldn't have it. He turned to the window for some air. Daylight was dying, the moon rising gold behind the poplars. What sound was that? Why, that piano thing! A dark tune with a thrum and a throb. She had set it going. What comfort could she get from that? His eyes caught movement down there beyond the lawn, under the trellis of rambler roses and young acacia trees, where the moonlight fell. There she was, roaming up and down. His heart gave a little sickening jump. What would she do under this blow? How could he tell? What did he know of her? He had only loved her all his life, looked on her as the apple of his eye. He knew nothing, had no notion. There she was, and that dark tune, and the river gleaming in the moonlight. I must go out, he thought. He hastened down to the drawing-room, lighted just as he had left it, with the piano thrumming out that waltz or foxtrot or whatever they call it these days, and passed through onto the veranda. Where could he watch without her seeing him? And he stole down through the fruit garden to the boat-house. He was between her and the river now, and his heart felt lighter. She was his daughter, and Annette's. She wouldn't do anything foolish. But there it was. He didn't know. From the boat-house window he could see the last acacia and the spin of her skirt when she turned in her restless march. That tune had run down at last, thank goodness. He crossed the floor and looked through the farther window at the water slow flowing past the lilies. It made little bubbles against them, bright where a moon-streak fell. He remembered suddenly that early morning when he had slept on the houseboat after his father died, and she had just been born, nearly 19 years ago. Even now he recalled the unaccustomed world when he woke up, the strange feeling it had given him. That day the second passion of his life began, for this girl of his roaming under the acacias. What a comfort she had been to him, and all the soreness and sense of outrage left him. If he could make her happy again, he didn't care. An owl flew, queaking, queaking. A bat flitted by. The moonlight brightened and broadened on the water. How long was she going to roam about like this? He went back to the window, and suddenly saw her coming down to the bank. She stood quite close on the landing-stage. And Soames watched, clenching his hands. Should he speak to her? His excitement was intense, the stillness of her figure, its youth, its absorption in despair, in longing, in itself. He would always remember it, moonlit like that, and the faint sweet reek of the river, and the shivering of the willow leaves. She had everything in the world that he could give her, except the one thing that she could not have, because of him. The perversity of things hurt him at that moment, as might a fishbone in his throat. Then, with an infinite relief, he saw her turn back towards the house. What could he give her to make amends? Pearls, travel, horses, other young men, anything she wanted, that he might lose the memory of her young figure lonely by the water. There, she had set that tune going again. Why? It was a mania. Dark, thrumming, faint, travelling from the house. It was as though she had said, "If I can't have something to keep me going, I shall die of this." Soames dimly understood. Well, if it helped her, let her keep it thrumming on all night. And, mousing back through the fruit garden, he regained the veranda. Though he meant to go in and speak to her now, he still hesitated, not knowing what to say, trying hard to recall how it felt to be thwarted in love. He ought to know, ought to remember, and he could not. Gone, all real recollection, except that it had hurt him horribly. In this blankness he stood, passing his handkerchief over hands and lips, which were very dry. By craning his head he could just see Fleur, standing with her back to that piano still grinding out its tune, her arms tight crossed on her breast, a lighted cigarette